And as always, you can use the chat to ask questions, and my friends will let me know if there is a question. So where did we start? In January of 2023, we hired our team, and you can see that's our first team picture there, and those are the roles that we started with. We have morphed and changed since then, but that is where we started. And 4 of those team members were spread out across the state. Our 4 regional managers are virtual or remote. And then several of us are here in the University of Tennessee System office in Knoxville, very well supported by the infrastructure of the University of Tennessee System. I told Bernie recently, this is a great way to create a startup. It's a real startup culture because you're embedded within this larger structure. Anytime we need anything, a graphic designer, a press release, there is a resource that the UT System has available to support our work, which has been incredible. Next slide, please. So just some fast facts on where we've come from and where we're headed next. We did have a $20 million investment, like you heard Commissioner Reynolds share. That was ESSER funded, ESSER funding that will kind of run out in 2024. So we've been making plans for the transition. How do we get from this investment to a scalable, sustainable state investment that continues to support this great work? I always talk about that $20 million as research and development. R&D takes a lot of money because you have to pay for your mistakes, right? But we learned a lot from that $20 million investment. So now we can become much more efficient and effective with a smaller budget investment. So we have a $5 million budget now to work with, but that doesn't mean that our impact is going to shrink to a quarter of what it has been, because we have all of these great lessons and efficiencies of scale that we've learned over these last 2 years. We are connected to 11 EPPs. We have 720 registered teacher apprentices, give or take somewhere between 650 and 720. 70 district partnerships statewide, which is an incredible increase over the last year. We started out with about 20. So our regional managers have done just a tremendous job at connecting with every county in the state. And our programs reflect the needs of our local communities. So there's a good amount of diversity among our learners, among those 720 registered apprentices. We're really seeing a good match for the diversity of the communities, which we know is an effective practice when you're preparing educators. And we're preparing educators at a variety of levels, bachelor's, master's, licensure only. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Next slide, please. So what are some other things that we've been doing? Our team has accomplished a lot. We have applied for a grant opportunity, a large grant, which we will learn about here in just a couple of weeks. And we think we have a really good potential for getting that grant funding. And that grant funding would really help support the innovation efforts that we hope to engage in over the next couple of years. We've connected individually, one-on-one, or in small group presentations like this one with 2,100 leaders from the state of Tennessee and beyond, states like New York, North Dakota. So in the photo, you can see Charlene there on the left. She's presenting to a group of labor and workforce development folks in the state of New York. Tennessee has been highlighted in national work from other states, all along the way over this last year. And lots of district leaders locally. So those regional managers have worked very hard at building partnerships and connections within their districts to help learn what are the needs of our local districts. We had 1,700 aspiring apprentices fill out profiles for us. So we created a profile form where we asked folks, are you interested? If yes, could you provide us with some more information? Things like, what's your prior education and background? What degree are you seeking? What licensure area? We had over 1,700 people fill out that form saying that they were interested. And from that, we collected a good bit of data around what is it that we can design in terms of pathways that will truly meet the needs of all Tennesseans. We know that initiatives like Grow Your Own tend to take off quickest in urban areas. And we know that a lot of Tennessee is rural. And so in those rural, smaller communities especially, how can we design pathways that really meet their needs more effectively? That was one of our questions that we tried to answer through those profiles. And with that, I challenged our regional managers to provide outreach to every county in Tennessee and every school district in Tennessee. They've made contact with every single school district and county in the state, some of them more responsive than others, but they have made those connections with great results. So what did we learn from all of this data? Go ahead, Cheryl, to the next slide, please. We decided that we wanted to put together, really encapsulate, what do we know about our learner? Who is our learner? So we developed 4 learner personas, and we did not do this alone as staff in the center. So we engaged a work group. We called it the Competency-Based Apprenticeship Work Group. It had 40 participants from across 10 EPPs, and we worked together in virtual small groups from January through May of 2023. Some of you on this call were in one of those work groups, and those work groups looked at our data from those profile or apprentice profiles and put together 4 personas. And I'm going to run through those quickly, not in super great detail, because you'll have these slides afterwards if you want to read more about those personas. But personas are something that are used in business and software development very frequently. You want to know really specifically who it is that you're designing for. If you try designing for everyone with a very broad stroke, you won't end up meeting the specific needs of the user that needs to have their needs met. So we went about developing these 4 personas. And next slide, please. So you can picture these 4 personas as a talent development pipeline. Again, kind of a businessy type language that may not be familiar to a lot of our district leaders or some of our district leaders, but we did learn pretty quickly that really well-resourced large districts like Knox County, where we sit and where we are just a few floors above them, so it's easy access to go ask them, how do you do this? They have a lot of resources. They have a human resources department, they have a talent development specialist, they have folks who think in terms of a talent development pipeline all the time. Most of our rural districts do not have that. And so how could the Grow Your Own Center help resource and become that talent development pipeline support mechanism for all of the districts who don't have this really kind of robust human resources element of talent development? So we created these 4 personas: Callie, Bart, Andy, and Dante. And if you think about them kind of like a pipeline, you're probably going to have a lot of Callies who matriculate into a smaller number of Barts, and then an even smaller number of Andys, and maybe an even smaller number of Dantes. I'm going to walk through each one of those personas quickly. As I do, if any one of these personas stands out to you and you think, oh, I know someone who's like that, that sounds like my neighbor, that sounds like my uncle, those are common responses we hear, and it's super helpful for me just to get a sense as I talk to a variety of audiences for like, which one of these personas are people engaging with most often? So if you want to give a little like thumbs up when you hear a persona that matches someone you know, that's helpful too. All right, so let's start with Callie. So Callie is the widest part of the funnel, and the Callie persona is our recent high school graduate, or maybe someone who's still in high school. They're in a teaching as a profession program, so they're learning about becoming a teacher as a high school student. So our persona of Callie specifically is someone who has 6 dual credits from high school. They went through a TAP program. They're a recent graduate. They've never been employed. They're willing to work in any school district close to home, but it's a really high priority for Callie that she not have to move away from home. She does not want to go and live on a college campus. It's not interesting to her for whatever reason. There are lots of reasons that we've heard from our evidence and surveys, but the Callies of the world want to stay close to home, and she really loved her cadet teaching program in high school. She loved working in her elementary school as a tutor. She lives in a rural community. She wants to live at home while she goes to college. She already feels really connected to that elementary school where she was a cadet teacher, and that's a really important element of Grow Your Own. Retention for teachers, we know, is a struggle. It's a challenge. Retention is much better when folks feel connected to their local community. So we're growing folks from their local community for their local community. She's also very committed to a debt-free post-secondary experience. She does not want to go into debt for her education. So if she sounds like someone you know, give a little thumbs up there for a reaction. So imagine that funnel-shaped talent pipeline. School districts need a whole bunch of Callies, right? Because not all of them are going to become teachers, but our school district partners that we talk to, they are very excited about developing, augmenting, expanding their TAP programs. And many of them have not thought about those teaching as a profession students being part of the answer to their talent shortage for teachers in their community. So they're excited to try that. Okay, next persona. Next, we're going to talk about Bart. So Bart is someone, so think about, have you ever met a Bart? Bart is someone who works in a local school, and he's not a teacher, he's not a licensed teacher, but he's an adult. He's been in that school for a long time. Our Bart here, he works in a remediation room. So you might think of an in-school suspension supervisor, or a restoration coach, some schools call them, but someone who's really good with kids who feel like disenfranchised from school, who feel like they don't fit. He comes highly recommended from his principal for his ability to build rapport and relationships with students and their parents. And his school leader really values that skill that Bart has. But Bart he's not super excited about general education courses. He is not excited about forms and emails. And every time he's tried to go back to college in the past, he just gets overwhelmed with all the paperwork and the bureaucracy. And he says, this is not for me. So we know that's a barrier we need to help Bart overcome. He's on his way to getting that associate's degree, but he's not there yet. Could his school district and Grow Your Own design a pathway for him so that he can stay employed, stay in his local school, performing in his role as an employee, while also working towards becoming a teacher and having the ability to really double his salary by becoming that licensed teacher? That's a pathway we want to provide for Bart. Okay, next persona is Andy. So Andy has an associate's degree already. She went to her local community college and got that associate's degree in teaching. And now she's got this choice to make, because she would have to move in order to go to college. One of the things we learned from our apprentice profiles is that 45% of the people who filled out that aspiring apprentice profile did not have access, meaning physical location, geographic access to a bachelor's degree program in the state of Tennessee. So it wouldn't matter if we had all the scholarship money in the world for those folks. They would have had to move in order to go to college, or go to a national online program like Western Governors or something like that. There was no local solution for them that was a drivable distance on a regular basis. So Andy is in this boat where she can't leave home to go to college. She's currently employed full-time as a teaching assistant, making about $20,000 a year. She would really love to become a teacher and double that paycheck at least. But she has some worries and concerns. She's worried about passing the Praxis exam. She's worried that coursework may feel like busy work, since she already has a lot of the skills of a teacher. She watches those teachers every day, and she feels like she already has a lot of those skills. She has a full-time job and a family, and she needs her courses to have a predictable structure and clear applicability to her work life. Those are some of the things that she desires in her education. According to CALE, one of our national partners, Council for Adult Experiential Learning, 43% of college credits are lost on transfer. So think about that for a second. Our Andys of the world who have to transfer, move from one school to another, associate's degree complete, moving into a 4-year EPP, 43% of the credits potentially that Andy earned may not transfer. Hopefully that's not the case in Tennessee. Hopefully we've been doing a good job with our transfer pathways and our articulation agreements, but that's part of the work of the Grow Your Own Center, is to ensure that our associate's degree in teaching completers have a transfer pathway into a bachelor's program that ensures that every single credit that they took counts for them towards that bachelor's degree. And that's part of the work that we have to do, because we know currently that isn't always the case. All right, last profile. We don't have Dante's completely written yet because we're still collecting a little more information, but Dante has a bachelor's and a master's in English. And this is another population of student that we see who is interested in becoming a teacher. They already have degrees. Many times they have several degrees. We met a doctorally qualified audiologist recently who wants to become a teacher. So these folks have a lot of education under their belt. They obviously know how to do school. They obviously have strengths in the liberal arts and general education, but they need that licensure only pathway. They need a post-baccalaureate licensure only certificate that is a very efficient, affordable way for them to access the profession. And currently, that particular pathway is a little challenging for folks to access. So that's something we want to work on as well. Dante has discovered that he has a love for teaching because he's employed part-time as a college teaching assistant for some college classes. I just met with a faculty member over at UT Knoxville a couple weeks ago, and she described for me perfectly some Dantes that she knows from her coursework. She supervises an English program. She has teaching assistants who have decided they love teaching English and they'd love to teach at the high school or community college level. And she was asking me, what are the pathways available to them? He doesn't necessarily want another degree, so he doesn't need a master's in education. He just needs that licensure only pathway. He wants to share his love of English. He doesn't need to make a lot of money. The book learning part of school is pretty easy for him, but he needs exposure to the art of building a community of learners. So an apprenticeship just seems like the ideal pathway for him because he knows the content, but he needs the skill and practice in a school-based setting, really the art of teaching and developing a community of learners. So that's Dante. So if we go to the next slide and we look at that pipeline one more time with those names and personas filled in, you start to get a sense for the work that we want to be able to do to strategically help our school districts think about their talent pipeline. We want them to think about how many high school students might you want to have in your TAP program so that some of them might choose to stay in your district while they get their associate's degree at their local community college. And then how many of those associate's degree students might matriculate into a bachelor's degree program? And could we plan now with your district for those apprenticeship openings, those registered teacher apprenticeship roles in your school district? So plan very proactively. For example, if you have math and science teachers who are nearing retirement 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, could we plan so that there are 2 or 3 registered teacher apprenticeship job openings in math and science in the next 3 to 5 years, 2 to 3 years, so that when those folks retire, you have, several apprentices potentially who are ready to step into those roles for you to choose from as a district. So those are the kinds of strategic talent pipeline conversations that we're having with our individual districts. If you'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, so some emerging practices, some things that we've learned as we have worked through these personas and we've met with districts. What are some emerging bright spots, some learnings that we have picked up from the Grow Your Own Center that we're trying to spread across all of the school districts we work with? Well, first, go ahead and just click through these, Cheryl, as I go. Thank you. So first, it's really important to have a full year of coursework and clinical experience before becoming the teacher of record with many of these audiences that you just saw. So job embedded programs, residency programs, those are out there and they're great. They meet a need too. So no one in Grow Your Own Center is saying that registered teacher apprenticeship is the pathway for every single learner. What we're saying is that it's a very important tool and one of many. Job embedded and residencies do not have this full year of coursework and clinical experience before becoming a teacher of record. And our district partners have told us that not everyone is ready day one to have the keys to the classroom. They need that coursework and clinical experience for a time before becoming the teacher of record. And that's what apprenticeship provides. So it's a missing tool in the tool belt that is as a newer tool for districts to think about. Next one. Consistent training and increased engagement of mentor teachers. This is another area where we've really tried to expand our practice. Our mentor teachers have not had a lot of resource and support invested in them for this particular model. So they have for student teaching, they know what that looks like, but this is very new, teacher apprenticeship. And so we are expanding and increasing the type of engagement we might expect from mentor teachers. And they're responding very positively. And many times it's invigorating for them as professionals who've been in their careers for a while to be able to invest in someone else. Next. Competency-based teacher education credit. So this is a newer area for a lot of our EPPs, but what this means is that these educators, like you saw in our personas, who have been in classrooms and schools for a while, is there the opportunity for them to earn college credit based on competencies they already have prior to entering a program, or could they gain college credit based on the competencies that they are demonstrating through their daily work and their on-the-job learning in lieu of coursework that they might take from their EPP? So that's an emerging practice we're working on. Next. All right, I just addressed that one, so we'll go on to the next one. Peer-to-peer support networks. We know that one of the reasons adult learners don't persist is because they don't feel supported and connected. So we're working on how can we better connect peers with peers, apprentices with apprentices, maybe apprentices who are a step or two ahead of apprentices. We have some great models that we've learned about that we're excited to try to implement in the next couple of years. Next one. Online coursework coupled with synchronous opportunities for connection, really hybrid and blended learning. If you look at the research on delivery modalities, and I'm sure you all have heard this, criticism or skepticism about the effectiveness of online learning. Some of it's valid, but really the bottom line is that hybrid and blended programs are just as effective, if not more effective, than the face-to-face programs that exist. It really all comes down to design, the design of the program. How is it maximizing benefits? How is it minimizing risks? When there are problems and challenges and programs are ineffective, it almost always comes back to design. Can we improve the design of the program? And generally, yes, we can. We can make things better as opposed to saying the whole modality doesn't work. Next. LEA is offering teacher apprenticeship job openings as long-term talent development strategy. This is an area that is new for some of our LEAs. So they have traditionally seen teacher apprenticeship as an urgent, I have to fill a seat, I got to get somebody in that classroom, which is valid and real and not to be devalued at all. But can we start to shift folks' understanding to also include talent development, long-term strategy for teacher apprenticeship? And then last one, we do think it's still really important that we maintain this no cost to eligible learners pathway. So what attracted a lot of these learners to Grow Your Own and had them fill out that profile in the first place was this potential that they might have a no-cost pathway into the teaching profession. All right, next slide. So does it work? We get lots of questions sometimes from folks around, how do you know that Grow Your Own and job embedded and teacher residencies, how do you know that it works as well as a traditional program? And so here are some emerging results. This is new enough that, like, as a researcher, I can't say, after 15 years of data, here's what we know to be absolutely true in every situation. But here are some emerging results that we see from Tennessee's data, from Texas's data, from New York's data, and West Virginia and some other places. Higher than average intention to stay in the profession. So folks who are in Grow Your Own programs typically want to stay in the profession. They intend to stay in the profession longer than those trained through traditional means. Next one. Higher than average retention in their program of study. So our retention rate currently for Grow Your Own programs hovers anywhere between like 88% and 95% retained from one semester to the next, which is pretty phenomenal given the average rates of retention in programs in non-Grow Your Own programs. Next one. Increased job satisfaction for mentors. So mentors have reached out to us and said things like, hey, I'd like to know better ways to support my apprentice. I feel like I could be doing more to help my apprentice become an even more skilled teacher. Can you help me with that? They're very engaged and interested in kind of passing on the legacy of teaching to the next generation. Empowerment for district leaders. This is a big one for me. As I talk to district leaders and listen to them, there's been a sense in the past where they've felt a little powerless. They've had to kind of watch the declines in enrollment at their EPP partners, which, if you want to know statistics, it's about 39% over the last 9 years of declining enrollment in EPP programs, specifically in Tennessee. District leaders had to watch that happen and really felt pretty powerless for what they could do to increase their own talent development pipeline. In the business world, no business would watch their talent development pipeline dry up and not be able to do anything about it. They would find ways to train employees to be able to source the talent that they need. And this program and others like it, so job embedded residencies, Grow Your Own program, teacher apprenticeship, TAP programs, pre-apprenticeship, paraprofessional apprenticeship, all of these tools are tools that we are putting in the tool belt of district leaders to help empower them to grow their own talent development pipeline. It's not perfect yet. There's lots of bumps along the way, but there is a growing sense of empowerment that I think is really important. Increases for enrollment in minority populations. This is another really important one. We know that students who, African-American students, teachers of color, are going to resonate culturally with those students and help them progress more quickly, more effectively than a school that does not reflect their particular culture. This is also true in military communities, in rural communities. Students who can see a sense of themselves in the teachers they have in front of them tend to make better progress than students who feel that alienation or that disconnect from the folks who are educating them. Higher than average persistence, completion, and retention for teachers of color. We also see this. Tennessee Educators of Color Alliance, TECA, is a great resource for those statistics if you have a curiosity about that, what that looks like. And then last one, when evaluated by their impact on students' test scores, and this comes from Texas's data, but when we look at the impact of alternative credentialing programs on students' test scores, teachers trained through registered teacher apprenticeship are more effective than teachers who are credentialed through alternative pathways. And the way alternative pathways is defined, it means teachers who are put in charge of a classroom before they've had that full year of coursework and full year of clinical experience. So teacher apprenticeship, remember, has a full year of coursework and clinical experience before someone has the keys to the classroom. That's not an alternative pathway. An alternative pathway says, here you can become a teacher, and we'll train you as you go. So there's some evidence, at least in Texas, that has had somewhat of a negative impact on students' test scores. We know that teachers who are in Grow Your Own programs don't seem to have that same type of effect. So that's a very promising emerging result for this tool. All right, next. So what are some current barriers that we are working to overcome? So you see a list there on the screen. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but I'm going to pause for a minute, probably take a drink of water, and just let you browse through those. And if you want to come off mute and hear more about any one of them, or put a note in the chat, let me know, and I'm happy to give you the 1 or 2 minute update on any of those bullets. Are there any of them that you're skeptical of, that you think that doesn't seem like a legitimate barrier to me? No skeptics? All right. Are there any that you would choose as a high priority? If you had to pick one as a highest priority, what might it be? I see.
Erin, we have one in the chat.
Great. Where do we currently stand with regard to EdTPA and praxis requirements for GYO and other alt pathways? So currently EdTPA is still required for Grow Your Own, but it is not required for Job Embedded. We've kind of escalated that as a concern for some folks to say, this doesn't seem equitable that EdTPA is still a requirement for this group while it's not a requirement for this group. So there is some ongoing conversation about how that might change in the future. Good question. Praxis is still required for everyone, to my knowledge, unless something has changed recently. We do have a resource that is working really well. Study.com, Keys to the Classroom, has provided access to test prep software for everyone who is a teacher apprentice in the state of Tennessee. And we are just seeing phenomenal results from the use of that tool. So we have a whole report with lots of statistics around usage and the impact of that usage. But the bottom line is, when students do the study.com lessons prior to taking the praxis test, if they do 90% of the lessons in study.com, they are almost guaranteed to pass their praxis, which is pretty phenomenal. So now we're talking to EPPs about embedding that study.com kind of lessons and modules along the way. On the job learning not being recognized for credit. Great, Clint. So yes, so we would love to get to a place, and we've had lots of conversations with our EPPs about this, but we'd love to get to a place where the on-the-job learning that apprentices are experiencing counts as clinical experience coursework for them. So the coursework for clinical experience wouldn't be a separate course, but it would be mentor teachers could assess and evaluate within the classroom to see that credit can be granted in partnership with the faculty from the EPP. We're not cutting them out or anything, but it's much more of a team approach. An instructional team provides that assessment for those candidates for their clinical experience requirements. Highest priorities, access and expense, definitely. Yes, the expense does span many of these. keeping the cost down is going to provide access and make the pathway attractive to a lot more folks. Getting access to courses and student support. Yep, Jack, for sure. Yep, good ones. Okay, thanks for that. Next slide. So what projects do we have currently on our docket that address a lot of these barriers? So you see them listed there on the screen. Same thing here. I won't go through them in detail, but take a minute to browse through those. Let me know if you want a little more information about what any of these might be. Some of them are earlier in the process than others. Funding is always a big question. It's been a key topic of conversation with our EPP partners because we have shifted from being able to fund full tuition for every learner to a smaller funding amount. And so we're asking folks to work with us to reimagine what it might look like to offer pathways at a reduced cost from the EPP so that it can still be entirely covered for the learner. So we don't want learners to incur the expense, but we want to work together, braid funding from the state, potentially from the school district to cover mentor stipends, at least local workforce development boards, Pell, Reconnect, Promise, Tennessee Hope, and the Grow Your Own grants from the allocation that we have from the governor's budget to make sure this is no cost for learners. But that means that we're all going to need to pitch in and make that pathway affordable so that we can serve the greatest number of future teachers. LEA strategizing. So yes, we are about to launch a series of 3 webinars where we're going to start talking with LEAs, give them the opportunity to have discussions and help teach us really about their budgeting process. And we're going to also help them strategize for a longer term talent development pipeline strategy. Like I talked about earlier, where they're looking at their potential retirees or their places where they have the hardest time finding teachers for their pipeline and strategizing ahead of time, not just for job openings, but for apprenticeship openings. And how could we start to advertise and plan for and budget for apprenticeships? Typically, our apprenticeships right now are teacher assistants in special ed, because that's what districts are used to staffing. They're used to staffing teacher assistants in special ed classrooms. And so that's where our apprentices end up working. But what if we have someone who wants to be a secondary math teacher? So we want districts to start thinking about, how do we budget for an apprenticeship for secondary math? No, we typically wouldn't have a teaching assistant in secondary math, but could we budget for a $20,000 position so that we have that apprenticeship person who's being trained who could matriculate into that position or move into that position when we have the opening in the future. So those are the kinds of conversations we want to start having with LEAs to help them think in that direction. I'm sure we will learn a lot about what is productive and helpful for them and how best to support them in that work. But it seems to have resonated with them so far for the folks we've talked to. Yeah, sure. Anybody else before I wrap up? Well, feel free to drop it in the chat while I wrap up with our last slide here. So one way that you can help us out, a very common question that we get from folks when we start talking about additional pathways, expanding pathways into the education profession, right? Aren't you worried about internal competition? Aren't you worried about sometimes cannibalizing is the word used, which I don't love, but it does communicate a certain image to folks, right? Like, aren't you worried about students choosing this pathway instead of going to a particular, EPP's in-person program for that 4-year traditional program? And so one response that I found really helpful, and that you all can help us in this work, this advocacy work, right, to give this response as well. Tech companies say this all the time. They say disrupt or be disrupted. So we have to, instead of being disrupted by outside forces like the great big WGUs of the world who have 212,000 students, We want to disrupt ourselves so that we can continue to stay relevant and meet the needs of our audience. So a quick analogy that I often give to folks when I get this question, or that when I sense this tension from people around, like, aren't you worried about internal competition? Just imagine that there was only one physical fitness program. Imagine that there was only one way to be physically fit. And everybody else who wanted to be physically fit was told, well, you have to do yoga. Obviously, it would never work, right? Because we're all at different places in our lives, in our ability level, in our motivation. And we need very different things in order to become physically fit. Some of us need a team to be a part of, and we need the accountability of being there in person. Some of us need something that's very flexible that I can do while I'm traveling in my hotel room via my, virtual coach who's on my phone. Some of us have access to a gym. Some of us don't. Some of us have a backyard that we can go to, and that's it. So some of us have physical limitations and we can't lift weights, so we have to be in a pool. So just think about like all of the different types of physical fitness programs that there are to meet all of the different levels of motivation and ability and location needs that people have. Education is very similar. Education is not easy. It's work. You have to work at it, just like you have to work at being physically fit. And so what are all of the ways that we can reduce and remove barriers so that people who want to become teachers have access to it, no matter who they are, no matter how old they are, where they live, what school they have access to, what technology they have access to? There is a pathway that meets their need. So no one at Grow Your Own Center is saying that any one of these pathways is any better than any others. That's one way you can help us share the message. We're not saying, teacher apprenticeship is the one and only thing. We're saying there is a need. There is a tremendous need for educators. There are many people out there who want to be educators, and we need to do a better job at providing access and affordability so that all the people who want to be an educator have that opportunity. Okay, that's the end of what I had to say. We'll flip to the